I told you I was excited. After I'd finished up replaying Resistance Fall of Man, I was ready to jump straight into Resistance 2. I did have to make a video on Fall of Man before I could dive straight into the next game though, which if you haven't seen is in the top right corner or the description. But once I finally booted up Resistance 2 again, I was pumped. Resistance 2 is the entry in the Resistance series I personally had the most nostalgia for. And after I had such a great time revisiting Resistance Fall of Man, that only got me more excited to get back to this game. The only problem with testing out this nostalgia was that I couldn't. You see, I don't remember all that much about the single player campaign, other than the big bad Chimera bosses. And instead, my nostalgia is tied to Resistance 2's multiplayer. It was easily my most played online game for the PS3. I could not get enough, and unfortunately, it no longer exists. So this is probably a channel first. I'm revisiting a game in Resistance 2 in which I have so many positive, nostalgic memories tied to the game, but not for the mode I can test. I have faith though, so let's get stuck into it. Resistance 2 released in November 2008 and was met with both financial and critical success, at least on the critics' side. Resistance 2 seems to be a game in this series that people just aren't a fan of. Some fans ranking it down along with Burning Skies as worst games in the series. A little worrisome, but we're here to see for ourselves. How does Resistance 2 hold up more than a decade later? Is it worth your time revisiting or playing for the first time? Let's find out. Resistance 2's story continues directly on from the end credits scene in Fall of Man, which, if you hadn't played that game, Resistance 2 gets you up to speed with a quick previously on. Once again, we resume the role of Sergeant Nathan Hale, as we are taken into custody by soldiers from an organization known as the Special Research Projects Administration, or SERPA for short, and we are promptly sedated. When we come to, we're in Iceland under heavy fire and are shot out of the sky by Chimeran forces. Hale and our captor, Major Richard Blake, survive the crash, and Blake leads us through the SERPA base, in which we find test subject Daedalus, a Chimeran leader who Blake ends up releasing or just outright fails to contain. Hale and Blake rescue Dr. Malikov, and all the remaining SERPA forces abandon the base. It's here where Blake explains to Hale that he is what's known as a Sentinel, a soldier a part of Project Abraham who was infused with the Chimera virus, and he is not the only one. The story resumes 2 years later, on May 15th, 1953. Hale, now a lieutenant, and commander of Sentinel Unit Echo Squad, consisting of Warner, Capelli, and Hawthorne. It's here we also learn of what keeps the Chimera virus from taking over these Sentinels, as they must take a substance called an inhibitor regularly to prevent further change. A Chimeran armada has launched an invasion on the US and does what Chimeran invasions do best: overwhelms the population. Before Hale can undergo his scheduled inhibitor treatment, the underwater outpost he's in is attacked, stopping him from taking his treatments and allowing the Chimera virus to grow. It's from this point the story has Hale and Echo Squad going from state to state killing Chimera, taking out Chimeran ships and structures, trying to hunt down Daedalus, which leads to Daedalus killing both Hawthorne and Warner along with stabbing Hale, and really just doing anything so Hale cannot take his inhibitors, as the resistance is just constantly on the back foot, which ends up getting to a point where Hale just can't take these drugs anymore, and is now on the clock as to when he'll finally turn. This is a further problem for the resistance, as we learn Daedalus, formerly Private Jordan Shepard, was the first Sentinel, and this is the end result of not taking the inhibitors. Hale, with hours left before he fully turns, leads one final assault on Daedalus's ship and primes it with a nuke. Hale kills Daedalus as he attempts to stop this, absorbs his abilities, and Hale and Capelli escape just before the nuke goes off. Capelli wakes up from the explosion to find Hale has fully turned, and Capelli is forced to execute him. And that's the story for Resistance 2. Resistance 2's story is once again very intriguing, but this time it's not just because of the Chimera. Personally, I love the idea of the Sentinel Squad because 1, it explains sort of the unknown in Fall of Man, which was how did Hale not get infected, or at least turn, and 2, maybe it's conspiratorial on my behalf, but it's 100% believable that government organizations scared of a new threat like an alien invasion would begin experimenting on their own to try and find a solution. I think it's dark and twisted and a great touch to make both sides of this fight interesting. I think Resistance 2 does a great job as well of showing just how effective a Chimeran invasion is. We saw a little graphic in Fall of Man just how quickly the Chimera move through territory and take over, but here in Resistance 2, you understand why and how. The Chimera in Resistance 2 are also just more coordinated, having Daedalus act as the sole leader. At least that's what it appears to be, of the Chimera forces instead of multiple angels, and you experience the full effect of this singular hive mind. Daedalus is also a really effective antagonist, which is something I didn't think I'd be saying initially given he visually isn't in the game all that much, but he makes his presence known audibly throughout. He shows his power by killing Hawthorne and Warner with ease, and again, he's just shrouded in mystery, and learning his backstory and having him be the antagonist as almost a yin and yang, but also to show things to come for Hale, made this dynamic engaging. And that ending was really intriguing because, well, where the hell are we, or what happened? It's a nice cliffhanger given that we know there is another game to expand upon this potential. Unfortunately, it isn't all praise. Insomniac does its best, but Hale not taking the inhibitors just doesn't make a lot of sense. He just has too many opportunities to do so, even collecting the vials so they aren't destroyed, and yet doesn't take them. Maybe it needed to be clearer in-game as to how long these treatments take, but this felt forced to me. I also think Echo Squad could have gotten a bit more limelight to make having half the squad die feel more impactful, and I don't know why, but Capelli contradicts himself bad. Hale falls over and Capelli has to be ordered not to kill him, but Hale completely turns and he hesitates and apologizes. It just feels odd. On a more nitpicky side, I also liked the way Fall of Man's story was told more than Resistance 2, as I felt that way of storytelling was easier to follow, but that's just personal preference. On the whole, I think Resistance 2's story is just more alternate history goodness. I think they expanded upon this world in some really compelling and interesting ways. I loved the idea of the Sentinel units and further expanding on how the Chimera worked, and just had a good time in general experiencing this story. It has its issues for sure, but I think it adds enough to the mythos and world and gives you reasons to do awesome things that makes it a good time. And once again, it gets you excited to see what else they can do in this universe with the game's next entries. Resistance 2's gameplay is why I titled this video the way that I did. I think it adds and improves upon a lot of aspects from Fall of Man, but it also makes some puzzling downgrades that means I can't say this is an all-out improvement, which is a shame because Resistance 2 is a good time to play. First and foremost, an issue that if you're a returning subscriber, you'll have heard me complain about before, and if you're not, the subscribe button's right there, go give it a love tap for me. Insomniac added a weapon limit. I never thought I'd say it considering they make badass weapons, but they did it. In Resistance 2, you're now limited to just the 2 weapons, as opposed to the full arsenal in Fall of Man. And it just makes me ask why. I hate this mechanic, especially when it's not in a series from the start. Halo has always had this feature, and whilst I don't love it, at least it never teased me with one entry. Now granted, you do have more access to the full arsenal earlier on, along with a couple of new weapons, and usually if you need or should have a specific weapon, it'll be there ready and waiting for you to pick up. What I don't like about this feature is it limits experimentation. I don't want to risk throwing away a weapon I know is good or constantly has ammo drop for this unknown gun, or worse, I don't want to get stuck with no ammo, which happened to me and I had to improvise in an unusual way. The not enough ammo is a biggie. I want to pick up more fun weapons like the razor blade weapon or a grenade launcher, especially just in case I have to battle the multiple big bad chimera, but I rarely can justify being left with nothing. To me, this was an unnecessary change that at times can lead to you feeling stuck. Another strange choice Resistance 2 makes is the removal of vehicle segments, which, when you're dealing with this massive conflict across the United States, just seems like a missed opportunity. Not only could they have kept these larger vehicle levels, but they could have even added some flying or air combat as well, being such an open concept. These vehicle segments weren't for everyone, but at least they help change up the gameplay from time to time. Also, for being a part of a squad the majority of the game, the Chimera AI doesn't act like it. They'll constantly ignore your friendlies and just beeline straight for you, and when it's these hordes you'll come across that can leave you easily cornered, yeah, it's frustrating and not subtle at all. And whilst this happened in Fall of Man, they didn't improve it here either, which is enemies spawning long after you've cleared out a room just to try and cheaply wipe away your health. On the nitpickier side, why was sprint and crouch tied to the same button? A lot of negatives I know, and yes, I still stand by what I said in the beginning. I had a good time with Resistance 2. It's just with these downgrades or missteps that I can't say it's better than Fall of Man, which sucks because the improvements and additions are great. The new weapons like the Magnum, the battle rifle, grenade launcher, razor blade gun, minigun, paired with the existing but improved weaponry, and despite no full arsenal, you do get to mix and match quite a bit and find what guns will be instant pickups and what weapons will be for certain situations, but they all feel great to use. The enemies have also toned down on eating sponges and now go down much quicker, which is great because they throw so much more at you now. Mixing in flying drones with the zombie-like swarms to standard chimera, to slightly better chimera, to bigger tankier chimera, to flat out bosses from Fall of Man now standard enemies, all in one encounter. And when you aren't in these big battles, you gotta worry about the chameleons who you'll hear before you see, and will kill you in a single hit. Some people aren't a fan of these enemies, but just through pure tension, I love them. And they are pretty easy to take out, and with the addition of checkpoints it seems around every corner, if you die, you don't have to go too far back, if at all. The bosses are also a big improvement as they both, well, are bigger than before and just show how terrifying the Chimera virus can be. They aren't the most tasking fights, Daedalus is an odd final boss to say the least, but the spectacle of say the Leviathan or the Kraken breaks up that standard gameplay pace in a much needed way. Visually as well, or at least color wise, they added some real change in environments and often, which again breaks up the monotony really well. Overall, do you see where I'm coming from? I think Resistance 2 is a good time as is, but it had the potential to be better than the original, but through changing certain aspects that made Fall of Man good, they made Resistance 2 worse. It's that potential of being better and failing that hurts me the most because, as is, Resistance 2's gameplay is good. but it could have been great. Resistance 2 is not a perfect game, but I do not understand the outright hatred or people saying this is a bad game. Obviously, we're all entitled to our own opinion, and I've acknowledged and even agreed with a lot of people's problems with this game, but I think it does a lot right in terms of continuing this series. The story adds further intrigue and questions along with answering previous questions. The gameplay makes its mistakes compared to Fall of Man, but still is a good time to play. And once again, it's gotten me excited to keep playing the series. Does Resistance 2 hold up today? I think it does. I enjoyed my time playing it all these years later, but if you don't or didn't, I can understand why. I'm interested to see how the rest of the Resistance series holds up now though, especially after replaying Resistance 2, but we'll talk about that another day. Until then, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.